Okay.
Speaking of, apologists and Christian pastors that we know.
We have somebody on the line, and I'm excited to talk to you, Dean Meadows in Virginia.
Ooh, about Genesis 1, 2, and 3, huh?
I love it. I have so many thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Dean, welcome.
Hey, Dean.
What's going on, guys? It's been a quick minute. Hope you're doing well.
Yes, indeed.
We're so good. Did you see we got a kitty?
So if you recall, about 2 or 3 years ago, I don't know which one it was, Eric, we did a live stream at your apartment, and you had asked me a question about Genesis, and I told you, hey, the next thing that I was going to do is do a deep dive into that, and so I've completed that, and I just want to ask, like, when you guys were Christians, what were your thoughts about Genesis, and has that changed, and if so, why?
Yeah, great question. Eric, I'll let you go first.
I figured you didn't want to talk about the Kalam, so.
You know what? We're so happy. We're so happy we don't have to talk about the Kalam right now.
So I will probably have less to add than you. So yeah, I'll go first. What's kind of interesting, putting on the Christian hat again and thinking about it, we were pretty dismissive of a lot of the Old Testament. Because Jesus came and fulfilled the Mosaic laws. The Old Testament served a historical purpose and a contextual purpose for us to understand, or
We're so different here.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize. Okay, go on, continue.
I mean, they wouldn't say they were dismissive.
Oh, well, yeah, but like.
They wouldn't say it, but, it just, the interesting stuff happens in the New Testament. The Old Testament is where you go back to find kids' stories that you want to teach and have kids reenact things and pull out, characters like Noah and Samson and putting on the armor of God and all that good stuff. But I don't know. I think that the Old Testament was given more leeway. And even as a believer, it was a history. It was a history of a people, and understanding that, it just got more flexible room. And so when I would read Genesis, I would just take anything that might seem contradictory and be like, well, it's a story of a people. You know what? If it's probably a mistranslation along the way. There's some hiccup, and it's fine. I just don't know where the hiccup is along the way.
Wow, that's really cool. That's really cool. That is not my experience at all.
No?
No.
I mean, overall, it has changed in that I'm less forgiving. I still see it as a history of a people, but I don't see it as divinely inspired. And because of that, I look at things that could be seen as contradictions and go, you know what, that might legitimately be a contradiction. And because of that, I just put even less stock in it.
Oh, cool. All right, Dean, definitely engage with that first because we're going to go on a journey in a minute.
No, I guess my question to Eric would be, specifically how in your community of believers was Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 taken? Was it something that was preached or taught like, hey, this is something that literally happened, or was it taken as this is a framework, this is poetry, this is some type of different genre? How was that I guess communicated when you were younger?
No worries. I think if you were to ask my pastor, he would say that it was literal. If you were to ask others, it really depended, because I'm sure and when it comes to congregations, you're going to get a smattering of different responses depending on how strictly a certain family adheres to things, and so it kind of varies. But it was hammered home as true. It just, I don't know. I guess I may have formed the opinion that it was dismissive because when I would ask questions, people really didn't try and answer very hard. Anytime that something kind of contradicted or whatever, they would just go, oh, we don't have to worry about it because Jesus took care of it. Or, well, it's an allegory. It's a metaphor. So quit being so literal. And it just kind of turned things away and made excuses. And so maybe I'm not giving it as clear of a description as it deserves. But that's definitely the way when I think back, I feel about it.
Okay.
All right. So my experience with Genesis 1, 2, and 3 was extremely fundamental to the early versions of my faith. My family homeschooled their kids primarily because they did not want us engaging with evolution.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they bought us the Ken Ham books. They bought us Answers in Genesis, everything. That was a large part of my beginning of science education, quote unquote, was learning things like, oh, maybe there were enormous dragonflies because of the greenhouse effect that the bubble over the earth had. So you could just ride dragonflies back in the day. Doesn't that sound awesome? We don't have that anymore because sin. Also, people glowed. Adam and Eve, they legitimately, they exuded light. Not because there was any real reason for it, except that otherwise they would have actually been naked before putting clothes on, and that was uncomfortable. So we were like, how do we describe naked people but not admit that they actually were okay being naked?
I did not get that.
Yeah.
The only unique thing
deep into that subculture.
The only really unique thing I remember my pastor saying about Adam and Eve is that you would be able to identify them in heaven because they'd be the only ones without belly buttons.
I like that our heavenly bodies are supposed to have belly buttons.
Right?
Why?
I don't know.
So Dean, I went full in, there was no other option. As a kid, that's what I was taught. And dinosaurs existed at the same time as humans. They died in the flood. It was tenuous even asking to watch the Don Bluth Land Before Time series, because what does a land before time imply? And dinosaurs outside of people, what is this? And so it was just almost a paranoia level of having to negotiate how the secular world talked about history and what I knew to be, quote unquote true. When I got to my Christian college, that started changing. And I started engaging with it on a level that is a little bit more of the, biblical scholar level of okay, well, let's look at the discrepancies between Genesis 1 and 2. They were still all pretty much infallibilists. And so they weren't admitting things like there were errors or there was contradiction, but rather Genesis 1 was the technical account of what happened. And Genesis 2 was a poetic account of what happened. And so Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 would be different because they're trying to tell us different things, right? They're trying to tell us, this is how God did the thing, and then this is maybe why God did the thing or how we should view what God did.
I have to wonder if I was given that explanation as a kid, if I would have become an atheist faster or slower.
Yeah, because it was compelling with that bias that was already in my head. So it was still very much a creationist worldview, but it was one that was not dinosaur land levels of stuff. And then there were lots of conversations that we had in those classes about well, what does a steward of the earth mean, right? Based on that line in Genesis. Are we supposed to dominate the world, or are we supposed to take care of it like a gardener would? And we had to line up in the classroom based on where we were in terms of half the class thought we were dominators and half the class thought we were gardeners, and we looked at each other oh no, you're not a real Christian. It was tense.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I remember, so we got the stewardship stuff for sure.
Yeah.
But we didn't get that.
No, it was a major theme. And in fact, I almost didn't go to the Christian school that I went to because my aunt pulled me aside when she found out I'd been accepted and was like, do you know that I know a Christian who went to this Christian school and they left believing in evolution? And I was like, oh no. it's okay. I can withstand Satan. I can go. I'll go. Turns out I didn't
look at you
withstand
now.
Satan. That was my bad.
Apparently.
So ultimately, Dean, what changed for me more than anything else was learning about what Genesis initially was to the people who wrote those books, and kind of looking at it in the context of other cultures building mythology around how the universe got here, and kind of being like, okay, well, every culture has their creation myth, and this is the one that makes the most sense to me because it's the one I grew up with. That makes sense. Okay. And then I learned about Christian history like recently, like the 60s and 70s and the Scopes trial, and all of the push politically, just like 50, 60 years ago, to move into a very aggressive creationist space, which is where I grew up. And seeing that switch happen as a political motivator, as something that was done intentionally, and all of a sudden, and recently, to me, was that final nail in the coffin. Not that the Bible wasn't true or that I wasn't a Christian anymore, but that, oh, maybe this is a thing that is no longer something I should be building my faith around. So disproving Genesis to me, or making it less impactful, was a step, I guess, on my way to the deconversion process, but it wasn't the nail in the coffin.
Yeah. Damn, V.
Yeah, told you, a journey.
Yeah.
I'm going to catch my breath. Dean, thoughts?
Yeah.
No, I think that's interesting because, it seems like, I mean, I know that, and one of the other more interesting things about this whole topic is the amount of students, even as a campus minister at Blacksburg, that come to me, and one of the questions that seems to always be on the mind of students is, well, what do we make of this thing called Genesis? Mm-hmm. And is it something from a Hebrew perspective? Is it meant, I mean, did the audience that was written to then, were they expected to take this literally or figuratively or poetically? And so I've been working through, my own thoughts about Genesis, because I like to go back every now and then and just say, all right, well, where are we? I know this is what I was taught growing up. This is what I was taught in seminary. And so,
Dean,
when I look...
Yeah, but can we take a very, very brief detour, because you said something and I'm super curious about it. You mentioned being taught about this in seminary, and I'm very curious how that went. Like, what did they teach you about Genesis in seminary?
Really quick, for people who don't know.
It depends on which seminary you go to, I guess, right?
Right, in your experience.
So I've always been taught that Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3 were literal, and that to be a Christian, you have to be a Young Earth Creationist. And what I find in that, the problem with that, of saying you have to be a Young Earth Creationist in order to be a Christian, is that I think it causes unneeded internal fights amongst Christians. I don't see anywhere in the text of Scripture where Jesus says, instead of saying, pick up your cross and follow me daily, he says, be a Young Earth Creationist and follow me daily, right? So that's just a struggle that I've had with that internal battle. Is this something that is necessary? And now I don't find that necessary.
Okay.
I don't find it necessary to be a Young Earth Creationist. I actually, not that I've, been 100% there, but I actually am between the mytho-history view and the framework view, both of which are two different genres that don't require a literal interpretation of Genesis, because I find some things in Genesis that seem to fit with other ancient Near East types of literature. And so it's interesting to me, even in the Christian spheres, people will say, you have to take Genesis literally, because if you take it figuratively, it demolishes Christianity. But nobody says that about Revelation, right? Where you've got three-headed dragons, where you've got streets of gold, where you've got all of these things that seem to be
You may have missed the first
I wish, but unfortunately, the only thing that was talked about with as much fervor as Genesis in my family was Revelation.
Yeah, dude.
right.
We're the same
the
age.
One book nobody understands, but everybody is concrete on.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we're the same age. You remember the Left Behind series, right?
Oh God.
Right.
Like that was a whole thing.
No doubt. And so, but my point is that it doesn't seem to me that in the larger Christian community, if I were to say, I think there's a lot of symbolism, apocalyptic literature in Revelation. I don't know that anybody's ever called me out for saying, oh, well, you're not taking the text literally and you're not a Christian anymore. And I guess my question that I wrestle with now is like, if that's a okay position to take with something like Revelation, then why would it be a wrong position to take when it comes to Genesis? And for the life of me, I can't figure out why one is looked at as, well, this is okay to hold this symbolically, but this over here you can't hold that symbolically. So that's just where I am, and I have to give credit where credit's due. If Eric hadn't asked me that question when we were live streaming, I don't know that I would have said, you know what, that's a good question. I need to go back and look at that. So I appreciate that.
The fact you've been thinking about it for a year or two blows my mind. Can I ask you another question now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's put Genesis down for a second, and let's pick up Numbers and Kings and Acts, and let's look at the walls of Jericho, right? If we were to take a look at the story of the fall of the walls of Jericho, that whole story, right? If you were to find out that it was less of a giant fortification and more of like a fence, would the fact that it was a fence still mean that the story's kind of true, or would it just not be true for you?
I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I guess the first thing I would have to do is look at what the ancients considered a wall, what the Hebrew word was for wall. Could it be double translated as wall or fence? And then, do an investigation. But to be frank with you, I don't know, because I've never even thought about the walls of Jericho being a fence.
The scholarship is interesting. Or one other, because I know that we have other calls that we need to take, but I want to give you one other. Okay, so I've heard believers who are really, really into studying the archaeology around this. What if Moses did not bring thousands of Israelites out of Egypt and into Canaan? What if it was more like 50 people? What if it was just a small group that went, and then when they went into Canaan, they found that there was an emerging group that were calling themselves Israelites that they kind of morphed into, right? If somebody were to change it from thousands and thousands of people exiting Egypt to 80 people, would that still be kind of true?
Right. Would
it be false? Because I know some people who have completely gone, oh my gosh, if it's not thousands of people, this is a lie. Mm-hmm. It is not what it says in the Bible. And there are other people who go, oh, well, this is the foundation upon which this story comes from. And what it's really describing is, how these people have kind of mythologized their history. And to me,
right,
I would look at that and go, but if it doesn't say that in the Bible, if it says something different in the Bible, then whatever you're learning from it, great. But you first have to understand that the Bible is not telling the truth. You know what I mean? And that's what I want to learn from you, is kind of where you fall on that and why.
Right. Well, I don't have. I do think that in order to understand ancient literature, you got to understand the culture. And so, for instance, there certainly is in the ancients, there is this. There are times where they use severe hyperbole to show a point, right? So, if for instance, even in modern terms today, if we were playing basketball against a team and someone asked me how I did, I said, we killed them. We killed them when we played them. They wouldn't look at me and say, you killed 10 people playing basketball? You killed the starting lineup?
You must be a very bad basketball player.
No, of course.
True.
No, of course we didn't do that. What we're saying is, the score was so high, we obliterated them to where they didn't have a chance. So I don't put it past ancients to do that. A bunch of ancient Egyptian kings did that in battles. So do I think that that's elite? Do I think that that's plausible? Like, hey, instead of bringing thousands or hundreds of people, it was 80 people.
Dozens.
And they used hyperbole to explain that. I think that's a possibility. Does that mean that they're not telling the truth? I think they're simply using the literary devices of their day to, prove a point. So I don't know. I haven't looked at that either. So there's still a lot I have to look at.
I want to go.
Okay, then one last thing, because I know V wants to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dean, I just want you to chew on this. If that's the case, then what could possibly make it false? Is there any way for it to be false?
Yeah, sure. So if let's say if it was hyperbole in the crossing, but if they never crossed, that would be false. If something like the Exodus didn't happen, or something like the conquest of Canaan didn't actually take place, then that would obviously prove the text to be inaccurate. So that would make it falsifiable.
Dean, I'm working on videos with Holy Kool-Aid. You should check some of those videos if you haven't.
Right.
There's very little evidence. And honestly, here's the thing. If you can't really prove that a couple dozen people didn't cross the desert. And because of that, I'm even willing to grant that, just because why not? But that's really, you can't falsify that either.
Can't falsify what, the crossing?
Yeah.
If it's only a couple of people?
Yeah, if it's a couple dozen people, if it's 200 people, I'm willing to grant 200 people will cross a desert. But that, again, that's not the way it's described in the Bible. Like, that sounds like an unfalsifiable claim. How could I possibly prove to you that the crossing didn't happen when it can dwindle down to dozens? You know what I mean? Is there?
No, I see what you're saying, and I guess you'd have to show. Just me spitballing off the top of my head. Yeah. I guess you'd have to show that. I guess you'd make a probability argument from that point and say, hey, listen, given what we know or don't know about the evidence, it's more probable than not that this didn't happen, and therefore it's okay to say that we reject it. So I guess the next step would just be to make a probability argument based on what we have.
I would love to have that with you, but I would just love to talk to you, period, Dean. You are just fun.
I know. I miss you guys.
And we miss you too. V wanted to talk to you.
Real fast before we let you go.
Yeah.
I did want to kind of jump on why you initially called and something that you said about it. The reason that people, in my experience, are a lot more protective of a literal translation of Genesis than Revelation is because without the first Adam, there couldn't be a second Adam, right? I think the concern that a lot of people have is if there were not two fully formed, like Homo sapien people who showed up, automatically had all of the same mental capacity and emotional understanding and consciences and guilt and all of this that we have today, then the idea that sin entered the world through one person kind of goes away, because then you have to ask, okay, at what point did we become sinful and not just animals? Or wait, are we still animals? And at that point, what is sin? So I think the reason that so many people really hang on to that is because of the narrative of sin entering the world and needing Jesus to come and get rid of it or save us from it. Is that something you've encountered before?
I think I've heard that probably back when I was in seminary and from some Young Earth Creationists. But where I am at Blacksburg on campus, at least some of the students that I've had conversations with, there doesn't seem to be this big disconnect or concern between, I guess you'd say, evolution and Christianity being true. I guess what some students would tell me is that even if evolution is true, if evolution is true and something like the resurrection took place, then you could still say that the foundation of Christianity is still historically accurate. So I find that to be a decent argument. I know we could go all day just about the resurrection itself, but I think what we need to do from the Christian end is say, let's at least, it's my biggest issue is not that people have these beliefs or have these thoughts. It's that in a lot of areas in conservative Christianity, you're not even allowed to ask the question, right?
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I'm now able, just in my own personal life, to say, okay, well, let's just ask the question and throw it out there and have a conversation about it. So,
well, if you're afraid of what the answer might be, you seriously got to rethink what it is you're trying to protect.
Well, isn't that funny? A lot of people who say we've got the truth are so scared to talk about the truth. Right?
Yeah.
I would.
I mean,
I would pay cash money to hear this conversation had out more, because if you believe in sin but you don't believe in the Adam and Eve story, then there's really no need for a resurrection. And like if that's the case, then were we just afflicted with sin if you believe in sin? And wouldn't that make God just kind of a dick?
Well, that's where it gets interesting, because this is one of the things that we had to talk about a lot in my mandatory theology classes, which is, okay, if evolution happened and Genesis is not literal, the interpretation needs to change, but it can still stand. It's just we can no longer say it's penal substitution as the reasoning for the resurrection. Maybe it's something else. All right, well, let's find other things that God might want to save us from. And so, there's this interesting thing, because then you get into this idea where you're like, okay, but wait, the whole backing for Jesus as the sacrifice is based on the ancient Hebrew practice of sacrificing an animal to pay for your individual sins. And so if it's not that, then what was that? And you can't use those to defend that anymore. So it becomes really sticky. And I would love to have a longer conversation about it, but we need to move on because this is almost half an hour.
So I figured that at some point we can have that conversation. And I do have a long-winded answer for that, but we'll save that for maybe another call. How's that sound?
Beautiful. We would love to have you call back and dive into this some more.
I have so many more layers I want to add to that.
It's been a month of Sundays since I've called, so it's good.
It's been a year of Sundays. Your last call was in July, man. All right.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling in.
Take care, guys.
Bye. Oh my goodness.
I love when he calls in. This is somebody who teaches apologetics, is an apologist, has gone to seminary, is a minister, is now a campus minister. Obviously we disagree, but the fact that we nerd out on the same subject means we can still have these conversations.
Honestly, yeah, the two callers we've had so far have taken up quite a bit of time. I'm realizing now, looking at the time. We've got about half an hour left.
That's okay.
But they are both theist callers who enjoy this conversation and the idea of like asking these questions and coming up with these answers and digging for more information. And honestly, that is what this show is about. Like, I know that we come to you in a format that is very much more aggressive a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And the expectation is it's us versus them, right? But Skeptic Generation is about connecting with people and having these intense conversations. And I saw someone in the live chat put it perfectly. I don't remember who you were, so I apologize for not being able to attribute this to you, but these kinds of calm conversations about these subjects is what is terrifying to organized religion, right? Yeah. As long as they can keep us at each other's throats, and as long as they can keep us saying, we're right, no, we're right, everything's going to stay the same. But the second that we start being able to sit down across the table from each other and be like, oh, what were you told? Well, this is what I was told. Have you ever thought about this? And start connecting those dots.
It's like discussing your wages in the workplace.
Exactly.
You're not supposed to do that. And for people who I see in the comments, well, you didn't shut them down hard enough. How you didn't convince this person during the conversation? It took Dean 2 years of thinking about this before he said, hey, I want to talk about it again. That's just how people work.
Yeah. We can't rush these things. Unfortunately, we can't. And honestly, I don't think I'd want to. All right, we've got...
Before we dive into the next call, I just want to say, hey, everybody, this show is brought to you by you. If you like what we do and you want to either support us, or even if you just want to get free stuff, because we put out an ad-free version of this podcast and we put out an ad-free version of this live show the same afternoon that it goes out.
We also have added a new perk.
We have added a new perk. We have several perks, including conversations with patrons. So if you like what we do, you want to support us, or you just want to get the ads out of this stream, consider going to patreon.com/skepticgeneration. That's patreon.com/skepticgeneration. We are also building a studio, and we've got some goals this year. Our big goal this year is we want to get a production computer, because what's going right now is barely making it. So our goals this year are production PC and getting a live producer. So if you...
We have Georgie, but she doesn't have imposable thumbs, so
yeah,
it's a little hard.
She's been cruising around her legs.
She's just been like, if we've been like looking off to the side, it's because she's pounced on something and we want to make sure it's not a panel of foam on the wall.
Oh, that'd be fine for a little bit. That said, though, super chats are going towards those goals. And if you don't want to wait and you just want to see that we have access to those things, I've loaded up a whole bunch of stuff on the Amazon wish list, tiny.cc/SG wish list. Got to make sure that we plug it before we move on.
That sounds good.